Okay, good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining us for this evening, the Shloshim of my father, Avi Mari Rav Zalman Kossowsky. We are going to start with a siyum. Baruch Hashem, thank you everyone who was able to spend some time learning. We were able to finish all of Shas. So here in Israel, we're allowed to gather for a minyan as long as we practice social distancing. So we will start by making a siyum, and from there we will continue with the program. I've tried to mute everyone, but people can accidentally unmute themselves. I would ask you to please try and keep yourself muted, just so that we can keep the program flowing smoothly. Okay, so let us start the siyum. Yehuda?
Thank you very much. Michi, we'll need you for the minyan out here. So I want to, my father always started off, very often started off his Divrei Torah or his drashot with Poischim B'chod Achsanya. So I want to, as Michi did, thank everyone who organized the siyum itself, especially Rabbi Billet, thank you, and my brother Michi and my brother Joey and Duvi and everyone who organized the siyum, thank you. And again, echoing Michi, a huge thank you to everybody who learned. It was a very enjoyable experience watching people sign up. I know that some of us learned material that we haven't learned for a long time. And I know that my father would have found that meaningful and also a little bit entertaining. So thank you, everyone. When you're making a siyum on Shas, you could really pick anything. But as I was looking over what to pick, I remembered another thing that my father told me about Divrei Torah. He said to me that a good rabbi can create a drasha connecting any two topics, and a bad rabbi will. And so I decided to simply go with the traditional last mission of Shas, which actually is incredibly appropriate for Shloshim. The last seder of Shas is Taharos, and the last Masechet is Uktzin, and it deals with the Tuma and the Tahara of various animals. But the very last Mishnah completely departs from that, and the Rebuta Nazi clearly wanted to wrap up Shas in a meaningful way. Very last Mishnah of Shas. Amar Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, Asit HaKadosh Baruch Hu lahanchil lechol tzadik v'tzadik shlosh meos v'asara olamot. Shnei amar lahanchil ohavei shai v'otzroseim emalei. Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi says that Hashem will la'asi level, he will, every tzaddik will inherit 310 worlds. The Bartanura says this refers to Olam Haba and shows that the joy of Olam Haba will be 310 times greater. The Rambam characteristically says that there's no math. It's simply a hyperbole to explain how Olam Haba is the true reality, and 310 is just a number to help us understand that. The Tosfos Yontov explains when Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi says lechol tzadik v'tzadik. What's the lechol tzadik v'tzadik? This is an idea that I think is very appropriate for my father. Ben ha'oser uben ha'matir. Whether the rabbi was making something osir, or whether the rabbi was making something mutter. Lechol tzadik v'tzadik. As long as they were doing it l'shem shamayim. The more traditional explanation is that this is how we talk about all the different machloksin, but I particularly like the Tosfos Yontov's explanation that it doesn't. My father often used to talk about koach hetera adifa, and this I think very much is appropriate for him. And then the second half of the Mishnah, Amar Rabbi Shimon ben Chalafta, Lo matzah Kadosh Baruch Hu kli machzik bracha Yisrael ela hashalom. Interesting that the Mishnah first starts off with Ben Adam L'Makom and then to Ben Adam L'Chavero, then also the concept of Shalom. Again, as we've heard from all the people who've been speaking in memory of my father, Ben Adam L'Chavero, the notion of being Makar of people and bringing people together, making connections was his thing. And so, again, I think this is beautifully appropriate. Shene Amar, Adonai Oiz Lamo Yitain, Adonai Yavarech Es Amo Vashalom. And I will now do the, that's the end of the learning, and I will do the actual siyum. Hadron Olach, Tisa Sidrei Mishnah, with Hadron Olach. דעתן הלך שישה סדרי משנה ודעתך עלון. לא יסיישי ממך שישה סדרי משנה ולא יסיישי מנן, לא בעלמא הדין, לא בעלמא דעשי. הרב נא אדוני אלוהינו את דברי תורתך בפינו ובפיוס עמך בית ישראל, וניחו לנו אנחנו וצאצאינו וצאצאי עמך בית ישראל, כולנו יודעי שמך ולמדי תורתך לשמוע. והבית חגני מצוותך כי לעולם היא לי. לי יהי ליבי תמיד בחוקיך, למען לא יבוש לעולם, לא ישכח פקודיך כי בם חייתני, ברוך אדוני למדני חוקיך, אמן 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 סלע ועד. מועדים אנחנו לפניך אדוני אלוהינו ואלוהי אבותינו ששמת חלקנו מיושבי בית המקדש ולא מיושבי קורנות, שאנו משכימים והם משכימים, אנו משכימים לדברי תורה והם משכימים לדברי תהילים, אנו עמלים והם עמלים, אנו עמלים ומקבלים שכר, הם עמלים ואין מקבלים שכר, אנו רצים והם רצים, אנו רצים לחיי עולם הבא והם רצים לבאר שחר שנאמר אלוהים תורידם לבאר שחס, אנשי דמים ומראה לא יחצו ימיהם, אני אפתח בך. יהי רצון מלפניך אדוני אלוהינו, כשם שעזרתנו לסיים שישה סדרי משנה, כך תעזרנו להנחיל סדרים וספרים אחרים ולסיימם, ללמוד וללמד, לשמור, לעשות, לקיים ולכל דברי תורתך בעבר. ובזכות כל התנאים ותלמידי חכמים הנזכרים בשישה סדרי משנה, תעמוד לנו ולזרענו שלא תמוש התורה מפינו, מפי זרענו וזרע זרענו עד עולם. ויקוים בנו, והלכך תנחה עוזך, ושבתך תשמור עליך, והקיצוץ היא תשיכך, כי ביבו ימיך ויוסיפו לו לך שנות חיים, אורך ימים בימינך בשמאלה, אושר בכבוד אדוני עוז לעמו ייתן, אדוני יברך עמו ושלום. יסגדל ויסגדל שמי רבה. ועמל דו עשי לזכרתה, לאחיה מסיה, לעסוק ישון לחיי עלמה, למבנה קרתא דירושלים, ולשכלל היכלה בגביה, ולמעקר פולחן הנוחיה מערה, ולסבא פולחן דשמיה דאסרה, וימליך קודש בריחו ומלכוסי ויקרא, ויצמח פורקני וקרב משיחי. וחייכונו וימיכונו וחיי לכל בית ישראל, עגלה בזמן קריב ויאמרו אמן. אמן יהי שמי רבה מברך לעולם אמן. אבא מברך לעולם ולמי ולמיה, יסברך וישתבח ויספר וישרמם ויסנסה, ויסדר ויסעלה ויסעלל שמי דקודשו בריחו. לאלה מן ברכסה ושירסה, תושבחסה ונחמסה, דמירן בעמה ויאמרו אמן. על ישראל רבנן ועל תלמידיהון ועל כל תלמידיהון, תלמידיהון ועל כל מאן דעוסקים בארייתא, דיבה אשרה כדי שהדין דיבה כל עשר בעשר, יהיה לנו לכל שלמה רבה חינה וחיסה ורחמי, וחיי אריכי ומתוינו רביכי ופורקונה מן קודם אבוהון דבשמיא וערה ויאמרו אמן. יהי שלמה רבה מן שמיא וחיים טובים עלינו ועל כל ישראל ויאמרו אמן. אמן. שלום במרומיו, הוא יעשה שלום עלינו ועל כל ישראל ויאמרו אמן. Amen. Thank you very much. We will now switch back over to Michi.
Okay, thank you, everybody. Thank you, Yehuda. And once again, I'd like to thank everyone who participated in the learning. Tremendous that we were able to finish all of Shas. So the rest of the program is as follows. I'm going to present a short presentation about the life of my father. When we were sitting Shiva, many people were, who had experienced my father in different parts of their life. But very few people had known my father for the breadth of his life, with the numerous experiences that he had had. And it occurred to us that it would therefore be appropriate and meaningful and interesting to kind of do a biography of my father's life. And then my brother Divi will give a Dvar Torah, and we decided when we were doing the Shloshim that it would be fully appropriate, and I think my father would appreciate that the family would join together with the shul that he and the community that my father spent his retirement years with. He felt that it was far more than just a community; it was a family, and he had forged very deep bonds there, and a very special relationship that he often shared with me with Rabbi Billet. And I was talking to Rabbi Billet shortly after my father passed away, and sharing with him that my father appreciated the challenge it must be to have like a senior rabbi, kind of possibly being an armchair kind of quarterback, but that wasn't the case, and that he had tremendous kavod for Rabbi Billet, and felt that he could talk to him and share thoughts with him and engage with him in all sorts of meaningful conversations, both about Torah and other issues. So we're very happy to be doing this Shloshim with Rabbi Billet and the Anshe Chesed community. Okay, so I'm going to present. Okay, and if somebody out there could just do a thumbs up that they see it. Okay, fantastic, thank you. Okay, so this presentation, my brother Joey and I put it together, and it was a learning experience as we put it together. It's important when talking about my father would certainly have said this, that to explain my father's life, we have to go back a little bit in time to even before my father was born, and explain and talk about his family. My father was very much a very humble person. He didn't talk a lot about himself and his achievements, but he was very, very proud and reverent towards his parents and his grandparents and his ancestors, and deeply aware of the legacy that he had inherited. And he came from a long line of rabbis and Talmidei Chachamim and people who were busy with the Jewish community going back many generations. Pictured here is a picture of my father as a young boy, and my aunt with their parents, and my father's grandparents on my father's parents, Rabbi Kossowsky and his wife. My great-grandfather was born in Warsaw. He was the nephew of the Netziv, a brother-in-law of Rav Chaim Oizer Grzinski, and was a Rav in several towns in Europe before, in the early 30s, going to South Africa. South Africa was, at that stage, had a lot of English Rabbanim, and was, that's what kind of like the pedigree that they had, and the way my brother told it to me. I never heard my father say this to me. They were looking for, to bring a very mechubad, Volozhin, traditional European rabbi. I forgot to ask my Rivka whether that's completely accurate, but he went to South Africa in the 30s, significantly before World War II, and that will be incredibly important shortly. My great-grandfather, unfortunately, his first wife passed away after they had 3 children, and my great-grandfather remarried, actually his wife's niece, and they had another 3 children, the oldest of which was my grandfather, Rav Michal Kossowsky, who I have the privilege and the honor of being named after. My grandfather, Zechrono Livracha, was born in Ivia, where my great-grandfather had been rabbi, and then he studied in Grodno and then in Mir, and then at 25 got smicha and went on to hold rabbinic positions. He got married in 1936 to my grandmother, Rebbetzin Chiana Garber at the time, whose father was the Rav in Harduk. And that same year, they moved to Zelva, where where they lived, and my grandfather was the Rav in Zelva. A word about my grandmother. She was a very powerful person in her own right, a tremendous scholar and Talmidah Chachama. I learned my first Daf Gemara with her. And I remember on many separate occasions when she would give Divrei Torah and Rabbanim and Rosh Yeshiva would listen. I heard her very politely and in a very mechubad way correct Rabbanim as they gave shiurim from the other side of the mechitza. She was also very active in pre-war Europe in pushing support for the fledgling Yishuv in Eretz Yisrael. That's like the ground, the fertile ground that my grandfather, that my father grew up in. So when my grandmother was pregnant with my father, they decided that in late 1940 that they had to go. We have fascinating letters. Okay. We have fascinating letters sharing how the complexity with obtaining the visas, and I would like to take this moment to pay tremendous hakaras hatov to my great uncle, Rav David Shlomo Kossowsky, who was at that time living in Tel Aviv, who was able to, without internet and without any of the technologies we have, remotely coordinate and orchestrate the necessary visas and activities that were needed to get my grandfather, my grandmother, and my Aunt Rivka, and my not yet born father from Lithuania via Vilna to Moscow to get visas to be able to go eventually to what was then Persia, is now Iran, over land and sea, and then making it to Tehran, where they stopped and paused for my father to be born and for my father to become ready for travel and for my grandmother to recover, and then flew to Baghdad, and from there traveled to the Allenby Bridge, and then to get into what was then Palestine and as today Israel. It was a harrowing trip with numerous hardships, but Baruch Hashem, with a lot of siyata d'shmaya and no small amount of miracles, they were able to get to Israel, Palestine, and from there, after a while, they stayed there for a while. They lived in Bayit Vegan in Jerusalem, and then my great-grandfather had secured a position for my grandfather to be a Rav in South Africa, and then they went there. At this moment, I really also do need to pause and acknowledge my Aunt Rivka, who has been taking on the incredible job of actually documenting the family's history. There's a lot of stuff that I clearly didn't know or thought I knew and was actually wrong about. And my Rivka is now putting pen to paper. And so we're finally getting an accurate and detailed explanation of the family history. It pains me, of course, a little bit that, I would love to go and talk to my father about some of the things I'm hearing now. But unfortunately, I'm not able to do so. But they had a very special bond, my aunt and my father, as just two siblings who went through so much in the early years of their life. So my father grew up in South Africa. These are some pictures of him as a young boy, and my Aunt Rivka standing to him on the picture on the right. He went. They had a Jewish elementary school, King David. But when my father was getting ready to be bar mitzvah, and on the left, that's a picture of my father at his bar mitzvah. My grandfather felt that he wasn't happy with the options that were in South Africa. So he arranged with his brother, Rav David Shlomo Kossowsky, who did not come to South Africa. So he went to stay with Dod Shlomo and went to high school in Israel, in the Yishuv. At that time it was called the Yishuv HaChadash. We now think of it as the Yishuv HaYashan. And he went there and he went back. My father went back and forth between South Africa and Israel so that he could learn and study Torah and Limudei Kodesh in Eretz Yisrael, but still matriculate and graduate from and get a high school diploma, which he did. Once it was very hard, as we can imagine, coming, not speaking Hebrew, not knowing the culture and what it was, but my father adapted. He had some challenges, but eventually overcame them in moving and being far from his parents. But my uncle and aunt and the extended family that was living in Israel made my father very welcome and made him very comfortable. My father then carried on to study in Israel. He went and he learned in Kfar Chassidim, and he forged a very deep and meaningful relationship with the Mashgiach there, Rabbi Lapian, who then helped my father meet and the various different rabbanim and yeshivas where he would later get his smicha from. There's a story which my father told me at the time. I remember being shocked, and then, I never was able to actually put it together. Where, my aunt Rivka, was getting married in America, and my father was learning in yeshiva, and to go to the wedding would basically end the zman for him, and he had to make this tremendous decision of whether to go or whether to stay, and he debated, and I think he got some pressure from Revelia to stay and to learn, and that is ultimately what my father did. And Revelia rewarded him by establishing a kavua chavrusa with him, which was, I think, a tremendous source for my father. I think, though, that the lesson I took away from that story afterwards, hearing it from my father and certainly hearing it from my aunt, was that you go to your sibling's wedding. Regardless, my father got smicha. He got smicha from a number of sources, from the Rosh Yeshiva of the Meir of Finkel, which was very meaningful because that's who gave his father smicha. He also got smicha from the chief rabbi, the Rishon LeZion Rav Nisim, and Rav Reuven Katz was the chief rabbi of Petach Tikva, as well as from Rav Shlomo Yosef Zevin, who was the founder and the editor of the Encyclopedia Talmudit. At that stage, my father went to America and started learning in Ner Yisrael in 1962. He studied in Ner Yisrael. He got a master's in education from Loyola College in Baltimore. And he would then also become, in 1962, the first director of NCSY. And that picture here is from an NCSY convention. He would be the first director of the NCSY's Seaboard region, which eventually transformed into the Atlantic Seaboard region. And what's interesting is that his brother-in-law, my uncle, Rabbi Yitzchak Lowenbraun, would go on to be one of the most well-known directors of that region for more than 18 years. My grandfather, unfortunately, became ill in South Africa, and my father went back to South Africa to be with him, and my grandfather passed away in April of 1964, Chaf Vav Nisan, which is actually the day after my father passed away on Chaf Hei Nisan, which I think is tremendously meaningful. That my grandfather's yahrzeit was the day after my father's yahrzeit. My father then went on and married my mother, and they lived in Denver, and they had 4 children: myself, my brother Yossi, Duvi, and Yehuda. My father in 1971 received his PhD from the School of Communication Arts from the University of Denver. In 1972, my father was then took a position, his first rabbinical position. When he was in Denver, he was the assistant rabbi to my mother's father, Rav Shlomo Tversky, that's where he did his shimush, and then he went on to have his first stellar in Miami, in the Young Israel of North Miami Beach, and he was there for 2 years. until 1974. And then my family would return to, I mean, I was born, my brothers and I were all born before we went to Denver, before we went to Miami, and then we came back to Denver in 1974. In 1972, my father actually went and joined the U.S. Naval Reserve as a chaplain. And eventually he would rise to the rank of lieutenant commander and leave the reserves in 1985. I think that there were multiple reasons that my father joined the Navy, but one of the reasons that he told me was that he felt a tremendous sense of hakara satov to America, to the United States, for granting him citizenship, and for all of the Jews that it had allowed to come to its borders as they fled Europe and other terrible places, and gave them a home. And he felt that he needed to do something to give back to America, and he became and therefore joined the United States Navy. He told me that the reason why he left in 1985 was because for the years that he was in the Navy, they had allowed Jewish rabbis to grow a beard, but then in 1985, whoever took over as the head of the chaplaincy wanted rabbis to be clean shaven, and my father wasn't really prepared to do that. So he left. My father also had a period before his rabbinic career and right after and between his rabbinic position in Miami and the next one to do other work. He worked as a sales person for a technology company, and he did other things. And he always said to me that he was very grateful for that opportunity, in that he wasn't super successful in these roles, and therefore it gave him tremendous comfort as when he went over his rabbinic career, to know that this is what Hashem had intended for him, that when he was looking out from the pulpit at his balabatim, it wasn't like he said to himself, oh, I could be like these guys and doing all sorts of other things. He knew that he had tried other things. It wasn't for him. This is what he was meant to be. And it gave him a tremendous sense of comfort and confidence that he was doing exactly what he was meant to be doing. My parents got divorced, and then in 1977, my father married my stepmother, Dana Oppenheim, who was originally from Boston, and they lived in Denver for a while before my father received a position to become rabbi in South Africa. And then my father was able to go back to where the city and the country where his grandfather and his father had both been rabbis. He was there from 78 to 86. And he was, this was his first big, long position as a Rav in what was the largest shul in Johannesburg. I'm sorry, just my thing keeps jumping. My Abba and Dana would go on to have 3 children, my sister Daniela, and my brother Joey, and my sister Shira. Shira was actually born when I was in South Africa. I spent a year there, and I was not able to find the picture, but Shira was born very premature, and I have a picture of myself in the neonatal ward holding Shira, and she basically stretches from the tip of my thumb to the tip of my pinky. She was so small, and just ushered a nace that everything worked out well, and that she turned into the beautiful woman she is today. My father was, besides serving as a rabbi, he taught at Yeshiva College, which was the school that my grandfather had established, the Bnei Akiva Yeshiva elementary school and high school. And he was very active with Bnei Akiva, serving as the camp Rav in Machaneh, and served on the Beit Din. I remember that when I was there in South Africa for that year, my father was already becoming very active in looking for a way he was very sensitive to the plight of agunot, and he was looking for halachic mechanisms to introduce the concept of a halachically binding prenuptial agreement. He wasn't able to actually find a mechanism that he felt would be accepted across the world, but he worked and he met with gedolim from around the world to find mechanisms to do so, because it was something that my father felt was something that needed to be done. That the mechanisms that we had in place needed to be strengthened and enhanced. My father also wrote a siddur while he was there for Friday night davening with his own translation, and then my father was left South Africa, and my stepmother and the three little siblings to go to London. He got a request from the then chief rabbi, Lord Emanuel Jacobowitz, to serve as rabbi of the shul in Kenton, and he would be there until 1991. My father and the whole family established many strong relationships also while he was there in England. He was a part of the chief rabbi's cabinet, it was called, and responsible for Soviet and Arab Jewish affairs, which he was very active. I remember him being very active. My father and stepmother had the opportunity to be presented to the Queen. I remember my father telling me that he was also very appreciative of the ability to say the bracha of meeting a monarch, not something that most of us get a chance to do. It was lovely. Besides my three youngest siblings who grew up in England, my brother Yehuda also went to high school in England, was able to then spend, at this stage we were already all dispersing across the globe. I was in Israel and Yossi was in America and Divi was in America, so at least part of the family was together in England. And then my father took what would be his last rabbinic position in Zurich, of the Rav of the ETZ, which made him the Oberrabbiner, like the chief rabbi of Zurich. And he got very active by requirement, not just in being a Rav and being on the Beit Din, and being very active in process of conversion and Gior, working closely with the Rabbanim in Israel. And something that gave him no small amount of heartache, to be honest, because as we all know, conversion is something that is unfortunately fraught with all sorts of complexities and politics gets involved. But my father, being the amazingly calm and deeply caring person that he was very successful in navigating those waters smoothly, or relatively smoothly, I should say, and helping people. He was involved in giving hashgachas as well, but he was very makpid never to have his own name on the hashgacha. That was a political element he did not want to crawl into too deeply. So he served as a shaliach, as an agent to other hashgacha giving authorities. And then after a very long time and a very active rabbinical career, my father and Dana retired to Boynton Beach in 2007, where he was very active in this young community, Anshe Chesed. And my father loved his retirement years. He loved Florida. He loved everything that went into it. He loved wearing these absurd Hawaiian shirts just soaking up all of the atmosphere of being a retired Rav in Florida. We would all try to get down and visit them. This is a picture where we all gathered for my father's 75th birthday. And this was, I think, the last time that all of us were able to be together as a family. But my father certainly, man, and Dana certainly were able to spend time with all of their grandchildren. Some of these pictures are from Florida. Some of them are from Israel, Boston. My father, was, and Dana were Zocha, Baruch Hashem, to have many excellent experiences, and grandchildren, and my children and my nieces and my nephews all have amazing memories of my father, which they will treasure for years to come. And Abba, it's hard for me to imagine that tonight is your Shloshim, and that I have to say that I miss you. But I thank you. I have tremendous hakaras hatov for everything that I learned from you and that you taught me and that I experienced of your life. And thank you. With that, I'm going to stop sharing and pass this over to my brother, David.
Okay. Well, I am going to leave all of the officiating and appropriate comments to my brothers. I am finding myself very strongly, having very strong emotions, and therefore not really holding by remembering all the proper people to thank and appreciate, but certainly thank my brothers for what they have done to make the Shloshim happen. And it's very beautiful and very appreciated. It's interesting. I'm having difficulty finding something to keep during the Shloshim to really experience Avelis. We all are in shaving because it's Sfira. We can't go to weddings because it's Sfira, and even if there wasn't, there aren't that many weddings happening, and if they are, they're pretty small and only immediate families are being invited. The only thing I could find was not to cut my nails, even though there are a term around doing that today. But it's been hard to find something to be able to say I'm experiencing Shloshim, to something on myself, to be Mikabel Avelis. And I think that's, if Abba could pick the time when he would pass so that it would be the least imposition on his family, he did a pretty good job. There isn't really very much that we are doing now, and he didn't impose. And that's really kind of was kind of what Abba was about. He was really very considerate, very thoughtful of everybody he encountered. And I think this is just another facet, perhaps, of that. We've been listening so far over the past 30 days, and starting from the Levaya and all the way through Shiva, and through the past 30 days, I've had phone calls from people. So many people have shared with me and my family all sorts of stories, very touching personal stories, strong relationships that were forged, sometimes at very early stages of life, sometimes at later stages of life. It's all been extremely inspiring to me to see how many people that he affected and that were drawn to him. And he was so pleasant about his interactions. It's amazing that people were compelled or wanted to be able to emulate him and to follow his ways. It reminded me of a vort that I heard very recently. It's brought down in the Kedushas Tzion. The Kedushim brings a vort from the Ravin Hazov, which is, he says there are three ways that people will go about rebuking other people. Some people, unfortunately, as we know, like to go and straight out rebuke people and tell people what they're doing wrong. And we all know how successful that usually turns out. The second way of giving teichacha is by rebuking oneself. Sometimes you'll sit next to the person who you feel is doing something wrong, and you're within hearing, and you'll say, "But how could I do this and how could I do that?" And by rebuking oneself within the hearing of the other person can then reflect and say, "Well, I also have that challenge, and I also could get better at it." And then it's that way can go ahead and change and be improved, or make to improve themselves and to be affected by the person who they're listening to. But he said there's a third way, and that he attributes to Aaron HaKohen, and that is by saying nothing, but by forging relationships, and by being a person of extreme character, of behaving in a dignified manner, in a way that's filled with Torah, in a way that's filled with appropriate behavior, that people will be compelled or be interested or motivated to follow his ways. So the Rinazov quotes a pasuk and translates it as following. It's an amazing pasuk in the sense that it really speaks about what Abba did. The pasuk says in Malachi, Torah's emes hoisa b'fiu, the Torah of truth was in his mouth, but harsh words were never found on his lips. He went in peace and in the right way. And in that way, many people came back, returned from their sins. That he inspired people to be better by being with them, by being sincere with them, by creating relations with them. The story that depicts this the most is one that I might have shared with some of you. But the truth is that after today, where we had another ceremony earlier with a congregation in England and in Switzerland, there were so many stories that I could choose from. But the one that I saw firsthand was, I remember I believe it was in England, when I was visiting one Yom Tov. And it was a couple of days after Yom Tov, and my father walked into the house, and he had a big smile on his face. And he explained that what had just occurred was that they had a neighbor from around the corner that would drive on Shabbos. And my father never said anything, of course, negative to them, but he would always greet them warmly as a congregant and had a good relationship with them. But on Yom Tov, a couple of days prior to this conversation, the man was pulling out with his wife in a car on Yom Tov. And my father was out taking a walk. So they see my father. My father waves to them friendly and goes on. My father doesn't really think much about it after that. That day, this man came to my father and he said, Rabbi, we were so embarrassed that you saw us driving on Yom Tov. We were makabel on ourselves not to drive anymore on Shabbos and Yom Tov. And that was the way my father affected people. It wasn't by criticizing. It wasn't even about encouraging them to take on new things. It was about a relationship. And the more you were exposed to him, the more you wanted to be like him, or to do what he's doing, or to follow his ways, his pleasant ways. And that it's this pasuk and this verse from the Vidazov speaks to me so strongly of what Abba really did for all of those years, and the testimonies we've heard of that over the past 3 days are quite astounding. I believe that most of us can probably think of ways that we want to emulate, and we would like to become better. And my father, I'm sure, affected all of us in different ways. But I know there was one mitzvah that he affected all of us equally. And that mitzvah was Ahavas Yisrael, because we all loved my father in return for the respect that he gave us. So in that sense, it was unique, it was unanimous to be able to return that and to grow in Ahavas Yisrael, at least for my father, if not then for other people as well. That I think that that sticks with me more than almost anything else, was his love for people, and the way people responded to him was quite undescribable. So, that's I think he's Zichrei Baruch. That's literally what the message that I would like to share tonight was his, and it's really a reflection of everything that we've heard so far from everybody who has spoken. Is we need to be able to be an example of doing the thing that's right and do our best, but with sincerity and a consideration of the people around us. And in that way, we can be an example of how to be Oivdei Hashem, to be servants, to be people who go in Hashem's ways and impress the people around us. And my father certainly was an example of that. And we miss you, Abba.
Thank you, David. I now have the honor and pleasure to hand the wheel over to Rabbi Billet and members of the Anshe Chesed congregation. So, Rabbi Billet, handing it over to you.
You'd like me to speak first?
I think, or as you wish, you could just wrap up with after the community.
Okay, thank you. So I'm actually going to speak last, if that's okay. What I would like to do now, we are going to have 3 speakers from our end. I'm going to be the last of the 3. We're also going to have Arlene Fishbein, who knew Rabbi Kossowsky in his early days as a rabbi in North Miami Beach, as we've heard, and Kalman Friedis, who all of us know, but in addition to being a friend to Rabbi Kossowsky, sat next to him in shul. I don't imagine that they spoke too much during davening. But when you do sit next to somebody in shul, you also develop a relationship in those free times. So we're going to hear from both of them, and then I will conclude. I just want to thank the Kossowskys for putting this together. It is a special opportunity for us to hear about a man that we knew of in retirement with those crazy shirts that you mentioned. But I don't want to take away from the things that I prepared to say. So if it's okay, Arlene, you can go first, and then Kalman, and then I'll take over afterwards. Thank you.
It's a rather humbling experience. It's what I have to say. I cannot follow any rabbis. It's making me very nervous. But when I moved here to Boynton Beach, my friend Sandra Lurie said to me, "You know who's here? Rabbi Kossowsky." And I felt as if my life came full circle, because we moved back to North Miami Beach in 1972. Rabbi Kossowsky was my rabbi. And he set the bar extremely high for any rabbi that I've had, with all due respect to every rabbi, for any rabbi I've had afterwards. And it's because of what his son said, it was that relationship. We had one shul with a very diverse community, and he would stand on the bima in his kapata, eloquent and dignified and handsome, very handsome. And we would sit there wrapped. And I have to tell you that his sons would all be on the bima with him, and he would keep on going. And it was something very natural, because he made our community really a family. He had a huge presence, and what his son said, he welcomed everybody, and everybody felt welcomed by him, no matter how old you are, no matter how religious you were, no matter how much money. Nobody was more important than anybody else, and he was always, always there for us. But he never chastised us. He never, when he spoke, and I once said to him, I said, "Rabbi, years ago at one of your drushas, your Shabbat Shuvah drusha, you said never to wear red. We shouldn't wear red on Rosh Hashanah or Yom Kippur. Red's my favorite color." And to this day, I said to him, when I met him again after all those years, I said, "Rabbi, I never wear red because of you on Rosh Hashanah or Yom Kippur. It's something that's stuck in my mind." And it was his approach. I think he probably used positive reinforcement and behavior modification to help us grow. And we did. We grew as a community, we grew as people, and we grew in Torah and in our learning. And when, I don't know which you were speaking, you were talking about how he would teach and how he would become part of things. There was never anything that was beneath the rabbi. He became part of we had play groups in those days, and we thought he came to our play group because he really liked us, he wanted to be with us. And I realized that listening to you was another way that he helped us grow, because he would sit there, he would discuss our children, he would discuss Torah, and he would tell really good jokes. Always a lot of jokes, and make us laugh. And he was so much a part of us. We would take out the blow-up swimming pools, and we would sit there on chairs. And sometimes we would go to the house on 171st Street, which I don't know which of you remember. And I think you had a swimming pool there, and we would watch all of you in the swimming pool. My kids would play with Pam Gross's kids, Bunny Schreiber, and all this. You're nodding. We would all play together, and he was our friend. He was our friend. But yet we respected him, and we knew exactly who he was. We had a problem in North Miami Beach at that time with kosher meat. We didn't have kosher meat stores available to us. It was a time when all of a sudden we had to have glatt. So you had the Denver connection there, and we would order our meat from Denver. But the meat just didn't come from Denver. It came in huge, huge trucks, Alterman van line trucks. And one day, we didn't have cell phones then. All of a sudden, the rabbi came, and I think he had a station wagon, and all the kids were in the station wagon. Everybody was in the station wagon. He would come driving down my block, and this big, big truck was driving behind us, and there were a few families on my street who were part of the shul, and he would direct. The cows would be coming out, big, big cows, and he was the director. That was who he was. And he also established the carpools. And one of the things that he was really instrumental in North Miami Beach was mikvah, making sure that all the women went to mikvah, and he did it in such a nice, comfortable way. With his wife at that time would also help, and that was probably one of the biggest impacts he had, because the mikveh was far away. It was on Miami Beach. We didn't have our own mikveh, and he was instrumental in that. So I said to Sasha, what was the thing you remember most? And he said his children were always around. And his family, I'm almost done, Rabbi. His family was really the most important thing to him. And I think part of that was the extension that not only were the boys part of everything and his family, but we really felt we were his family, and by extension, he loved us and we loved him. He was so relatable, so much a part of us. We didn't want him to leave, and have wonderful, wonderful memories of him. Even when I would walk with him here, I have to tell you, we would talk about his voice, his grandchildren with that twinkle in his eye and that smile on his face that was reserved also for Dana. And may his memory be a blessing for us all, and may he be a Melis Yasher for all of us, for this community. And I know he's looking down at us with that twinkle in his eye and that smile on his face that was always there. And thank you for this opportunity. It was a very big honor. So thank you.
Thank you, Arlene. Kalman.
I didn't know Rabbi Kossowsky for so long, it seems, but I consider it fortunate to having had the opportunity to know him. I guess we met around 6 years ago. When we first met, of course, as anyone ever met Rabbi Kossowsky knows how charming he was, and his South African accent was irresistible. But of course, when you first meet somebody and you hear this charming accent, you meet this charming person, you don't really know, you don't really know the person right away. But over the years that I had the opportunity to know Rabbi Kossowsky, to get to know him, the charm went a lot deeper than just than just the accent. As I said, I was fortunate to know him, and I think that I appreciated what I saw in Rabbi Kossowsky even more as he unfortunately became not so well and struggled with that quite a bit the last number of years. It must have been very hard for him, which you could see, but amazingly, he really never complained about it. He was always positive about it. So I think a lot of what we heard tonight of how positive he was with other people, he worked on himself to be positive about himself also. He never succumbed to complaining or even getting depressed, it seemed, by his condition, which was certainly not an easy one. I got, I said Daf Yomi in the shul, and Kossowsky, when he was able to, when he came to davening in the morning, which after, it's a few years ago already that he couldn't come to davening anymore, and I know that it was very hard for him not to come to davening and not to come to Daf Yomi, because first of all, the only day that Daf Yomi is not in the morning right after davening is on Shabbos, it's usually before Mincha, and he always came to Daf Yomi before Mincha. When he and he told me many times, he just felt very bad that he couldn't come anymore in the morning. It was hard for him not to come. The only time he didn't come before Mincha, which was typical of Rabbi Kossowsky, as we're hearing tonight, was if there was a conflict between the Daf Yomi and Rabbi Billett's class before Mincha, depending on the time of year. And Rabbi Kossowsky was always careful that he would go to Rabbi Billett's class, even though I'm not saying which he wanted to go to more, he wanted to go to both, but he felt it was appropriate, the rabbi, who he was also very close with, and was also the rabbi of the shul, that he should go. He would apologize to me because he felt he should go to the rabbi's class, which we see was very, very typical of him. The charm was real. It was who he was. How he cared for other people, his consideration for the other person, whoever he was involved with, was a sincere consideration, and he put himself aside. He really, in spite of the accent, he really had no airs about himself. He cared about everybody who he was dealing with more than himself. He didn't hold himself up as a rabbi and the Talmid Chacham that he was. And in Daf Yomi, I just appreciated so much that if he had a comment to make in the middle of the daf, which people do, of course, it's learning, he was always so respectful. If he had to, never interrupted me, but if he had to make a comment, it was always almost apologetically that he would ask permission to say something. And of course, whenever he spoke, it was helpful to me for sure, and probably most of the people in the room. And yet he didn't ever say it and if he was actually maybe even clarifying something that I didn't say clearly, he didn't ever make me uncomfortable with his comments, which just, again, is just a testimony to his character. Rabbi Kossowsky was a mensch. And a mensch means more than a gentleman. Of course he was a gentleman, but a mensch goes much deeper than that. A mensch means through and through, his midos, his character was refined. And I don't think anybody is born that way. It was something he was conscious of, and he did have the zechus to spend time with, first of all, to grow up in a family with people who understood these things, and to learn by Rabbi Lapian, who told me that early on and shared with me a number of stories about himself with Rabbi Lapian, who was one of the Gedolim, one of the tzaddikim of the last century. Certainly, he just didn't learn with him. He learned how to be from such people. It was a zechus for him. He should be a Melitz Yoshik for Dana and all his children and the Jewish people who cared for so much. He's Baruch. Thank you.
Thank you to everybody who has who's spoken and shared so much. I know that for all of us who know Rabbi Kossowsky, and in general, whenever we attend these kinds of events, So we know the person from the snapshot of a life that we are familiar with. So hearing everybody have their own reflections based on their own history and experience is always enlightening to even family members, and sometimes especially family members who only see a person in the context of family, and don't always get to see the larger picture of a person's involvement in the world or in a community. So it's very helpful and very comforting for all of us to hear all of these things. Rabbi David noted that this is almost a perfect time for Avelus, so much so that you don't even feel it. But for many of us, we are feeling a longing and a loss for ourselves because of what's going on in the world. This method, even this method of observing a Shloshim, is odd, as nice as it is to gather from around the world together in this space. It's a strange time indeed. I don't usually do this, but were I to daily pose the question, how would Rabbi Kossowsky deal with the monotony of the day in and out that many of us are experiencing? I like to think that he would say, in his cross between his South African accent and his Havara Sfardit, Ezri me'im Hashem, oseh shamayim va'aretz, that my help comes from Hashem, who is the creator of the heaven and the earth. Rabbi Kossowsky had a deep-seated faith that he constantly reinforced to me, even when he would say the simplest line, Rabbi Kossowsky, how you doing? And he would say, Yeh tov, things will be good. Somehow they will turn out okay. Because, as I know he was thinking, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is watching, and he wants it to be okay. Though Rabbi Kossowsky served as a rabbi in several shtelers, the only congregants of his that I knew, or thought that I knew, before I discovered that Arlene, now I'm finding out that Sandra Lurie was a congregant over 4 years ago, are my brother's in-laws from Zurich. So all of my reflections are personal experiences of a relationship that I cherished, but even cherished now more than I ever realized. When I first met Rabbi Kossowsky in Dana, we were coming here very intermittently as a visiting rabbi on select weekends, initially infrequently, and then over time with increasing frequency. We were invited for meals, first with our 4 children, then our 5 children, and I recall in those earlier days when a shir would be hosted in members' homes, and the Kossowsky house was an occasional host home. The man I first met in those days was regal and tall, with a unique insight into the world and into the Rabbanus experience that was most reflective of his personal experiences, of course, but also a person who enjoyed it and was grateful to be, on the one hand, retired, but on the other hand, still connected through the internet and different rabbinic groups that he was a member of. In those early days, we'd often walk back to Windsong together, first when the shul was in Indian Wells and later after it had moved to our current location. We'd discuss all different topics under the sun. Rabbi Kossowsky would give me his insights on things I had said, always prefacing it with a Tanya de Messiah. Here's a teaching that would help, support, enhance that which you presented in the shul. In later days, those walks could go on in either direction, though, meaning to or from shul, though he was now in his Shabbos scooter. In the early days, he would often give the Dvar Torah Shabbos morning, because I wasn't here that often. In those days, there was a rotation of volunteers among the members before the rabbi position became more established. And he would also give the talk at Sudash Lishit. I noted at the funeral that he would always use the Yachin Uvoaz Mishnah during this time period of Sfiras HaOmer, as the study of Pirkei Avos was an important minhag to uphold between Pesach and Shavuos. Like many of us who knew Rabbi Kossowsky in his early retirement, and as Kalman just mentioned, I watched the painful toll the Parkinson's took on his body. Though I remember when Dana told me we just came back from the doctor, and the doctor has said it's not going to affect his mind. And she was very happy to hear that, because as we know, sometimes that's one of the first things to go. But in Rabbi Kossowsky's case, I can proudly and happily say, just as a colleague, as a friend, and for the sake of his family, who always knew him, that the way that I saw it, he was always 100%. Anytime I saw a news article about a Parkinson's breakthrough, I'd send it to him, naively thinking that he wasn't on top of it, but he always was. He had treatments over the years which Baruch Hashem minimized the shaking, and which helped his speech stay relatively clear. I mentioned at the funeral the miracle of the broken hip, which picked his head up from having his chin stuck to his chest for so long. You may have seen it in some of the pictures that Michi shared before. I have a picture from my son's bris in 2015 when Rabbi Kossowsky was given the honor of leading the benching. I think it was the following Purim when he fell, and I have pictures of visiting him in Moore's life with the biggest glow in his face and shine in his eyes when his head was perched atop the neck, as it should be after having been out of the proper position for such a long time. Both Rabbi Kossowsky and Dana made themselves available when, as sometimes happens, anybody who's in the rabbinate knows, and I needed to vent about something going on. In shul, he would always give me a yasher koach in advance as the Torah was being marched around the room before the drasha. And often enough, he'd tell me afterwards, hayayfe, good job. I wonder if I was zocheh to have him as a balabas, so that I could learn what it would be like to live as a retired rabbi one day. First, move away from your community. Second, don't get in the rabbi's way. Third, demonstrate that you are retired by wearing shirts you would never wear when you were working as a rabbi. And finally, to enjoy life in a manner you might not have given yourself the chance to when serving in the rabbinate. What will I miss most in his physical absence? Number one, his thoughtfulness. His telling me, it must be hard for you to have a retired rabbi watching you. No, it actually never was. How could it be? His coming to my classes saying he comes to show kavod harav, his helping refine a point I did not articulate well, but always in a manner that was nonchalant, and now I'm hearing that Kalman had a similar experience, not looking to overstep his own self-imposed boundary. We are learning together. He was deliberately supportive and deliberately not a towering figure, imposing himself and what he may have felt was a better way to do things. Those things he kept to himself. Number two, his friendship. Of course, he has an entry in my phone, so anytime that he called, I knew it was him. Yet every time he called, he would say, Avi Zalman. Now, mind you, I never called him by his first name, but the fact that he looked at me as an equal made that charade seem almost real. It's a gift that I could never repay, because how could I live up to being his equal? Sometimes he was just asking for a confirmation of something related to the shul, or a small favor related to his getting to or from shul, or maybe what I thought of something going on in the RCA. Come on, Rabbi, you must have a personal insight or an inside scoop because you're more active than I am. And number three, what am I going to miss? His presence. In going through those pictures recently, I see him at a men's club mishmar, at a shir, eating the cholent. I see him in the background of a Megillah reading, focused on following the text. His spot at Suda Shlishit was often right next to where I sit at the front of the room. Would make sure he had his lechem mishnah, whichever drink he wanted, the requisite tuna, the herring, etc. Others would offer him some cake or a cookie, and we would chat. The Dvar Torah would either elicit that haya yafeh, or a more thoughtful insight, always preceded by the eyes lighting up, the eyebrows rising, and a new chiddush that one thing that I shared triggered in his own mind. There's no question that we thought differently. Our minds work differently. But I can only imagine that we would have made an amazing tag team in a different mix of the crossings of time. His presence also gave some of our members a weekly lesson in patience. It's always a challenge to time the Zmiros and the Dvar Torah and the benching to the minute, so there's the least amount of lag time between benching and Mariv. And usually it works out okay. But one thing I would often forget is that while some people can bench in a shorter amount of time, Rabbi Kossowsky would take the time he needed. And as I always insisted on waiting for him for Mariv, whenever people would push to say, no, Mariv, I would say, we're just waiting for Rabbi Kossowsky. And that kind of courtesy is the least we could give him. And it always ended the conversation in a simple way. Who's going to argue with that? The first brisa in the last chapter of Pirkei Avos, which is not Mishnayos, but it's Brisos, it's chapter 6. It's actually the one which we're going to be reading this week and studying this week. It says the following. Rabbi Meir Omer, Kalosik the Torah lishma zochel advarim harbe. Whoever engages in Torah study for its own sake merits many things. V'lo od, not only that, ella shekol haolam kulo kedai hulo. Not only that, but the entire world is worthwhile for this person's sake alone. This person is called Nikra Rea, Ahuv, Oev Esamakom, Oev Esabrios, V'sameach Esamakom, V'sameach Esabrios. He's called friend, beloved. He loves the omnipresent. He loves his creatures. He gladdens the omnipresent, and he gladdens his creatures. Umelbashto Anava V'yira. Then the Torah clothes him in humility and in fear of God. It makes him fit to be righteous, devout, fair, and faithful. It moves him away from sin and draws him nearer to merit. And from him people enjoy counsel and wisdom, understanding and strength. Shenamar, as the pasuk says, Li Eitzia v'Sushia ni bina li gvura. That mine are counsel and wisdom, I am understanding, mine is strength. And furthermore, the Torah nosenes lo malchus u'memshala v'chakor din, and the Torah gives him kingship and dominion and analytical judgment. Umegalan lo razei Torah, and it reveals to him the secrets of the Torah. V'nasa k'ma'ayana misgaber v'chenhar she'eno posek, and he becomes a steadily strengthening fountain like an unceasing river. And here's the kicker: v'havei tzanua v'erech ruach u'mochel el bono u'megedalto u'ramamto al kol ha'ma'asim. He becomes modest, patient, and forgiving of insult to himself. The Torah makes him great and exalts him above all things. I mentioned at Rabbi Kossowsky's funeral that his original tall gait, which he carried for most of his life, was majestic. And I don't think that everybody is granted such gifts haphazardly. He was majestic. He was, in his own way, a representative of Malchus. Yes, he made the bracha when he met the queen, but in his own way, he was a representative of that. And it's a tall order to achieve all that the Mishnah says. And I'm sure that Rabbi Kossowsky, were we to ask him if he achieved any of this, he would probably focus on his own shortcomings. But I thought it would be a nice tribute to see what the Tiferes Yisrael had to say, because that's the commentary that I always saw him share when learning Pirkei Avos. And sure enough, this is what he says in the words towards the very end of this brisa: Umochel al elbono, forgiving of insult. Shebechol ha'ma'alos hagufaniyos v'ruchaniyos shezacha, and in all the heights, the physical extremes and spiritual ones that a person merits, afilu hachi lo yeh gas b'libo avuran, the person never lets it get to his heart and to get haughty on account of it. Elo yeh tzanua, rather the person will always be humble. Lasos ma'asim tovim shalo, to do the good deeds that a person has to do. L'Hashem, towards God, o la'adam, or to his fellow man. Hakol behester, everything is done under the radar in secret. Gam b'shei yizbonin b'darchei Hashem, and so too, when he contemplates the ways of God, mitzvosav, and God's commandments, lo yauz panav l'shpot aliyan al pi sichlo, he doesn't pass judgment on them based on his own knowledge and the way that he processes things. Rak b'tznius yachshov ben, he only thinks of them in humility. Moshe kasuv vayaster Moshe panav ki areit me'abit el Elohim, that Moshe hid his face at the burning bush because he was afraid of looking at God. Kol kach v'anavaso yer erech ruach lebeli lechos, and so too in his own humility, this person that the Brisa describes should be somebody who is just calm, doesn't get angry. And this idea of having a calm demeanor is one where he doesn't change from good to bad. Rather, he is constantly and consistently following in this character trait that he has acquired for himself and that he has made his own. And therefore, through his humility, this person will be forgiving of all insult to himself, to be good to all, both to those who love him and to those who are his enemies. So I can't find a negative word to say. I'm sure that, there's nobody who is perfect in this world, but I think that this depiction of a person who is just a Yirei Shemayim and a person who loves God and loves Torah, and of course, by extension, also loves his family, this is a beautiful tribute to the man that I knew as Rabbi Kossowsky. Many of us may have known by his first name. This is him. This is his legacy. And to his family and to Dana, I'm going to say in his name, Yihiyeh Tov. Things will be okay. You will always carry and cherish the memories that you have, as will we. And we hope that this memorial can serve as a source of chizuk for you and for all of us. And I'll echo the words that Arlene and Kalman ended with, that he should be a Meilitz Yosher for all, and his memory should be Hey Nishmasot Tzura B'Tzura Chaim, and his memory should be a blessing for all of us. Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi Billet, and thank you, everybody, and Arlene especially. You have reminded me of my distant past. Thank you for all of that. So with that, we will end the program, and we'll formally end this. If we were all meeting together in the shul and talking, this would be where people would mill about and get a chance to talk one-on-one with different people. Unfortunately, we don't have that opportunity, but I will invite people to take themselves off mute if they want to share a thought. We're all here. My stepmother, my siblings, my aunt, my cousins,
Your uncle.
my uncles, my aunts, everybody, the ganze mishpacha. So we will end the formal part of this and open this up if anybody would like to.
Michi, if I can just offer, maybe people can type things into the chat, because if you have everybody talking at once, you're not going to hear anything. That's a thought. Maybe otherwise people can work it out. But if you're going to leave this open, it's open to everybody, and of course anybody who wants to leave is welcome to do that as well. But thank you very much.
Absolutely. I did, by the way, in the chat, I placed the link to the presentation I made. So if you want to download that, because maybe those pictures will be good. And if that's not comfortable, I'll also send the link to Rabbi Billet, and he'll be able to share it with people who are comfortable. Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for coming. And
You can
thank you.
speak now. Huh? You can speak now.
Hello, this is Rabbi Schamfeld in Cubans Hills. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Whatever you said today, all of you, was not enough. And in fact, some of them said the Chidush Yorim could say that Shemish B'Gorosai, the Oyhavov. He says the person should be humble, but the Oyhavov, to his friends, they have to be ready to go and stand up for him and speak for him. Could say that Shemish B'Gorosai. So I want to thank all of you. I knew him well, not as well as some of you. I knew him Yeh. He was mamishnik and schus to be in his presence. And whatever word was said today was said with love, appreciation, and only divrei emes. And the Baruch Hu should help us that his eye will be kept on all of you who spoke and those with whom Rabbi Kossowsky was attached, and special feelings for Dana, an outstanding lady from whichever point of view. Amokom Yinachem. Somebody once said to get a Rebbe, why Amokom Yinachem Estem? But in this kind of situation, there are two who are sitting Shiva, the Oval and the Neshama. Estem is you and your Neshama. So I say this connection that he should be Kadosh Baruch Hu, should be Menachem Estem, he and his neshama, and especially all of us. Thank you all for arranging this event תהא נשמת הצורה בצער החי.
Amen. It was always a very important part of our lives, and as you have all been, and the zeicha should be a zeicha for you and for your family, the Melech Yosher for all of Klal Yisrael.
Thank you, Uncle Mati. Okay. Thank you very much for coming. It's been very meaningful hearing all of, like my brother said, and hearing all the different facets of my father's life. And we miss you, Abba. Thank you.
Matthew, we just want to thank you for uploading and also all the work to add the visual aids to this presentation. I've never been to a Shloshim. Actually, you get to actually see the pictures, the shuls, the family pictures, and it added so much depth and beauty, even for people who've known them since they were born, like myself. And I just think it was so beautiful, and I really appreciate all that extra effort, and thoughtfulness.
And I also told some of your siblings, that your father's story about being born, coming out of Europe like this, a real person is like Yocheved going into Golas in the Mitzrayim, it's sort of a very specific nace that he was born, and that he was able to bring his whole life, all of what was before in his history and all the yichus that you talk about in his old European ways, to the whole world, all the places where he went to, from, all these places you mentioned in North Miami Beach and Boynton Beach and Zurich and Europe and England and Eretz Yisrael and every place who he touched. You knew this is a person that came from a very strong rabbinic lineage, and you can see it in his every action. And he was such a happy, upbeat person and accessible to everybody. And we really miss him because he's a unique person, and he really fulfilled the office of uncle very well also, that he was able to connect all his nieces and nephews and great nieces and great nephews with charm and with great openness and happiness. And we'll miss him very much, and we hopefully will just help each other from now on.
For all of you and for Dana.
Thank you, guys. It was the presentation was a big family effort. Really, everybody, all of my siblings, Dana, your mother, and your siblings, everyone contributed pictures, and it was a big family effort. The whole presentation.
We saw the warm up in the WhatsApps. The pictures were amazing and beautiful, but just it adds such a beautiful dimension to this experience to see, you and your family pictures, him with the grandchildren, and that was just beautiful.
Thank you.
We'll print it out so the next generation will always remember him as well.
Yes. Yeah.
There was a story I recently heard. Someone called me up from South Africa, a story that I don't remember his name. He called me up one night, and he shared with me a story that Abba shared with him that really shows that what you want to call what yichus is, was what Abba really was able to bring from from his heritage. So he shared with me that Abba told him a story that when Kossowsky was first hired to be in South Africa as the chief Rav, so the brother brought him to Cape Town. And from Cape Town, he took a train to Johannesburg. So all of the dignitaries in Johannesburg and all of the people that had strived to bring him to South Africa were there to greet him. So as the train pulls up, everyone is standing around. There's a large crowd of people, and the doors open, and people leave, and there's no Rabbi Kossowsky. People are like, what's going on? After a number of minutes, Rabbi comes out, and people asked him, like, what happened? Where'd you go? So Rabbi said, well, it was such a nice train ride from Cape Town to Johannesburg. So I had to go say thank you to the conductor for doing such a nice ride. Isn't that so Abba?
So,
Like those strange people like who did something who none of us were aware of. To him,
Right.
it wasn't awareness, but it's to me also that he saw that as his lineage. He saw that's what his grandfather did. He would repeat it over the story of Yitzchak Kossowsky would do that, and he worked to follow in that ways. That was
Yeah,
unbelievable.
that's so funny. So him.
it's a good story, Jenny.
Family.
That's great.
I love that story.
Fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
How did he get back?
So we all have big shoes to fill.
Unfillable, but
Unfillable.
we'll
Absolutely.
do our best.
You sort of feel like in that generation, the way, and it wasn't like just because in stories and the retelling, the people who were from previous generations were bigger than life. It wasn't revisionist history because your father was someone we knew. But you just do feel like in that generation, they made people that they somehow, you just can't imagine people of this generation being able to do that.
So my great uncle, Rabbi Avram Twersky, said to me one time when I was making a similar comment to him, he said that for all that the difficulties that must have been for people's lives, that difficulty forged them, meaning people understood that being, first of all, being a good, being a proper, a good yid, but also being a mensch, took sacrifice, and they watched their aunts, they watched their parents and their older relatives, the sacrifice they went to live the way they lived, and therefore they appreciated, right? Mishum Tzar Agra, they appreciated how valuable it was, and that, you know, Baruch Hashem, we all grew up in a very comfortable, you know, world, and you know, we were already one step removed from those challenges, and our children are even so much more removed from those challenges that that while the world is an easier place to live in many ways, it doesn't sharpen us the same way.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Good point. Well, I'm sure he's relative for all of us, and the family should just stay together and be happy together and watch over each other like he would want it. So,
exactly. Amen.
I look forward to seeing everybody soon.
Thank you. Thank you, Mel.
Post this stuff in the chat.
Okay, thank you, everybody. It's getting a little late here in Israel. I'm going to wish everybody a good night.
Thank you.
A good Yontif. It's coming around, so.
That's okay, I'll say it. Thank you. It was very well. It was very meaningful, everything, all the effort you put in, very meaningful.
Thank you, Aunt Rivka. We couldn't do it
Thank
without
you, Meth. Methy, thank you, honey.
Thank you.
Very, very special.
It was very beautiful.
Very beautiful.
Thank you. But literally, Aunt Rivka, we couldn't have done it without you. So.
Right.
Okay.
I think we should thank Rabbi Billet. Rabbi Billet spoke very movingly.
Oh,
beautifully. And my father just loved Rabbi Billet. He just, every time I came, every time I would come to Florida.
Rabbi Billet always made him laugh, always left him with a joke and made him laugh. It was no matter how bad he felt, he felt better.
Yeah.
It was
Michi, the previous Zoom meeting where Rabbi Mervis gave a message and the Rav from Tzurich gave a message. If there's any way to send those out, they were very, very beautiful messages also.
Beautiful. Yeah.
I'll try and get those, Bela. I'll work on getting a copy of those and send them around.
That would be wonderful.
Yeah. Rabbi Mervis was wonderful. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, everybody, thank you, and really, b'saros tovos, and
Get my paper.
really tzioshir for us.
Thank you so much.
You made it.
Amen.
Thank you for coming.
Somebody's there.